The fog came before autumn that year to Las Palomas, Veracruz. It fell over the coffee field and over the orange trees and over the corridor of Ta Esperanza's house. Luciana was standing in that corridor when she saw dust on the dirt road. A man was advancing on foot. He carried a backpack and didn't hurry his step. 6 years Luciana had spent watching that road, 6 years waiting without quite knowing what she was waiting for. Mateo slept inside. The photograph in the wooden frame was on the shelf, as always. Welcome to Stories Between Lives. The man on the road was not a stranger. Luciana recognized him before he lifted his face. He was the father of her son, and he still didn't know it. 6 years earlier, Rodrigo Castellanos had received a letter at the kitchen table in his house in Papantla. He read it alone, a Tuesday morning. The letter said that Luciana had gone off with a man from the coast, that she had left word not to look for her, that it had all been a mistake. The letter had the slanted handwriting he knew, but the words were not Luciana's words. He didn't know that then. His neighbor Don Firm was at the door when Rodrigo finished reading. He saw how Rodrigo folded the paper. He saw his face. He said nothing. The letter had been written by Doa Amparo Castellanos, his own mother. Doa Amparo was a woman who knew how to use silence and paper with the same precision. When Rodrigo had introduced Luciana to her 2 years before, she had assessed her in silence. The daughter of a seamstress from Las Palomas was not what Doa Amparo had imagined for her son. There were lands to lose or gain depending on whom a man married. Rodrigo hadn't understood that yet. When Luciana became pregnant, Doa Amparo acted fast. She went to Las Palomas, to the house of Luciana's aunt, and spoke to her in private. She said with a calm voice, "Rodrigo already knows. He wants nothing to do with you or the child. There's another girl. The family has decided." Then she went back to Papantla and showed Rodrigo the forged letter. That was all. 2 conversations, a lie in each one. And 6 years of silence as the result. When Luciana tried to send a second letter to Rodrigo, a week later, the woman at the post office in Las Palomas told her that the previous letter had been returned, undelivered. Luciana asked why. The woman said someone had canceled the service to that address. Luciana understood then that the road was closed from both sides, and that it had been closed carefully. But what Doa Amparo didn't calculate was what Luciana was going to do with that silence. The worst moment was not the conversation with Doa Amparo. It was that afternoon when Luciana arrived at the corner of the Papantla Plaza with a letter written for Rodrigo, the second she'd tried to send him, and saw the Castellanos family car pass with Doa Amparo inside. Doa Amparo saw her. She rolled down the window. She said to her without hurrying, with the voice of someone who doesn't need to shout to be obeyed, "What comes from below stays below. Girl, Rodrigo has another road." And she rolled up the window. The car went on. Doa Ramona, the woman from the haberdashery, heard everything from the door of her shop. She didn't come out. Luciana kept the letter. She walked back to her aunt's little house. That afternoon, sitting in the corridor with her belly already large and her hands on her knees, she understood that no one was going to bring her good news, that she would have to live with what there was. She arrived at Ta Esperanza's house in Las Palomas, with her mother's green rebozo over her shoulders and a cardboard box with a little clothing and with the weight of everything she couldn't tell anyone yet. Ta Esperanza opened the door without asking anything difficult. She only said, "You've arrived. Come in." She had the fire lit and the coffee ready, as if she had known. The house was small. 2 rooms, a corridor with a view of the coffee field and the orange trees, an adobe kitchen with the soot of years on the walls. But it had a firm roof and dry walls. "Are you all right?" asked Ta Esperanza that first night, as she put a plate of beans on the table. "I'm whole," said Luciana. "Which is different." The old woman nodded. "Yes, it's very different." They didn't talk more that night. There was no need. Mateo was born in the early hours of a Thursday in January, with the fine Veracruz rain striking the sheet metal roof and the midwife Soledad holding the candle. Ta Esperanza was awake all night, going from the kitchen to the room and back, heating water and praying in a low voice, which was her way of taking part in everything that mattered. When the child cried for the first time, Luciana looked at him and knew 2 things at the same time: that this child had Rodrigo's eyes and forehead, and that she was going to raise him alone. "What are you going to call him?" asked Ta Esperanza. Luciana took a moment. "Mateo, name of an apostle," said the old woman. "That's good." From the time of her brief marriage, she had a single photograph left. It was small, black and white, in a wooden frame she herself had sanded. The 2 of them could be seen, she looking at the camera, he looking at her. Luciana put the photograph on the shelf of the room from the first day, because the child deserved to know where he came from, even if she didn't yet know how to tell him. What Luciana didn't know then was that Rodrigo hadn't forgotten either, that in Papantla he kept the forged letter in a drawer, and that some nights he took it out and read it again, searching in the words for something he couldn't find, because the words weren't Luciana's, even though he still didn't know why he knew it. The years passed over Las Palomas with the patience of the coffee field, slow and steady, and without hurrying. Each morning, Luciana lit the fire before dawn and put on the clay pot coffee. Then she knocked on Mateo's door twice. The boy was slow to wake, but came to the kitchen with his sleepy face and his eyes, Rodrigo's eyes, full of sleep. "What's for breakfast?" Mateo asked. "What there is," said Luciana. "Eggs, if the hens were willing." Mateo went to check the hens before washing his face. That was the order of things. Ta Esperanza was already awake, always first, always with the broom in hand, sweeping the night's dew from the corridor. That was how each day began. The next day was the same: the fire, the coffee, the 2 knocks on the door. And the day after, too. The mornings in the coffee field house had that quality of things that repeat so much they become part of you, where you no longer notice where the habit ends and the home begins. Luciana embroidered tablecloths and napkins to sell at the Sunday market. She learned the cross stitches Ta Esperanza knew by heart. Her mother's green rebozo hung from the hook behind the door, and she put it on when she went out to the market, as if it were a soft, inherited armor. Mateo grew with that house as his entire world. He knew the coffee field out back the way one knows the patio of one's own house. He knew when the oranges ripen and which hens lay well and which lay poorly. "This one doesn't want to lay," he told Ta Esperanza one day, pointing at the oldest hen. "None of them wants to," answered the old woman. "You have to ask them nicely. Do hens understand words? Hens understand the tone." Mateo thought about it. Then he went to speak to the hen in a very low voice. The next day, the hen laid. The photograph on the shelf was part of the landscape of his room. One Tuesday, when Mateo was 5 years old, he stopped in front of it longer than usual. Then he went to the kitchen with the photo in his hand. "Who is this man?" he asked. Luciana dried her hands on the apron. "He's your dad. Why isn't he here?" "Things happen the way they happen, my boy. Does he know I exist?" Luciana looked at him. It was a 5-year-old's question said with the precision of 40. "Not yet," she said, "but someday he's going to know." Mateo looked at the photo a moment longer. Then he put it back on the shelf, carefully, as if it were fragile. From that day, each morning as he passed in front of the shelf, he touched it with the tip of his finger. Just once, as a greeting. What Luciana did have, in a tin box under the bed, were the letters she never sent. 22 letters written in the first 2 years, when she still believed Rodrigo could read them someday. Afterward, she stopped writing them, but she kept the ones already written. One night, Ta Esperanza found her reading them in the kitchen by candlelight. She sat beside her without saying anything. "I should burn them," said Luciana. "Why?" "Because they're no good anymore." Ta Esperanza looked at the letters on the table. "Everything is good for something, even if we don't yet know what for," she said. "Keep them." Luciana kept them. 23 letters in the end, because that night she wrote one more. God willing, she thought, someday they'll reach where they have to reach. On Sundays, when Luciana took her embroidery to the market, Matteo accompanied her and carried the basket with the seriousness of a small adult. The market women bought tablecloths from Luciana and gave Matteo tamarind candies and told him he was good-looking. Matteo received them politely and saved the candies for Ta Esperanza. "Why don't you eat them yourself?" Luciana asked him one Sunday. "Because Ta likes them more than I do," he said, "and she doesn't go to the market anymore." Luciana watched him walking ahead of her with the basket. She thought that this child had learned to love well, that no one had taught it to him specifically, but that he had learned it from watching Ta Esperanza love well, without fuss, every day. Letters from Papentla came twice in those years. They weren't from Rodrigo. They were from a cousin who told her that Rodrigo was still in the region, that he had never married anyone. Luciana read the letters and folded them. She didn't answer. She didn't want Doa Amparo to know where she was. "What do they say?" Matteo asked when he saw his mother with an envelope. "News from far away. Good or bad?" "Neither one nor the other. Just news." Matteo accepted that answer. He was a child who had learned that not all questions have an immediate answer, and that the ones that don't have one don't need to stop being asked either. But that night, Rodrigo was going to read something that had spent 6 years waiting for him. Rodrigo Castellanos arrived at Las Palomas a Thursday in October on a boundary matter. He brought a map and an address, and the intention of resolving the matter in a day and returning to Papantla. In the plaza market, while he looked for the engineer's house, he saw a boy beside an old woman in front of an orange stall. The boy was 6 years old. He had a broad forehead and a square jaw and dark eyes and hands long for his age. Rodrigo stopped. He didn't know why. The boy looked back at him with that clean face children have who haven't learned to dissemble. Rodrigo kept walking. But 10 steps on, he stopped again. He went back to the stall. The old woman looked at him. He asked, without quite knowing why he was asking, "Whose child is this?" "My niece's," said Ta Esperanza. And she looked at him in a way that wasn't casual. It was the look of someone who has waited for that question a long time. "What's his name?" "Matteo." "And the mother?" The old woman didn't answer right away. She studied him. Then she said, "What's your name?" "Rodrigo Castellanos." Ta Esperanza nodded slowly. "Follow the boy," she said. "The boy knows the way." Rodrigo reached the door of the coffee field house at dusk. He knocked twice. Luciana opened. They looked at each other. They said nothing for a moment that lasted longer than a moment. "Rodrigo," she said at last. A single word. It wasn't surprise. It was the name of something she had waited for so long she had almost stopped waiting. Luciana. He didn't know what more to say either. Mateo peeked out from behind his mother. He looked at the man at the door. Then he turned around, walked to the room, took the photograph from the shelf, and brought it back. He held it up in front of Rodrigo. He said with the direct voice 6-year-olds have, "You're the one in the photo." It wasn't a question. Rodrigo looked at the photograph. He looked at the boy. Something in him broke in a way that has no name. He crouched down until he was at Mateo's level. He said nothing. He just looked at him. "Are you my dad?" asked Mateo. Rodrigo didn't answer right away. He looked at Luciana. She nodded once. "Yes," said Rodrigo. He had the voice of someone who says a single word, and with that word says everything he hasn't been able to say in 6 years. Mateo considered it. Then he said, "You have the same hands as me." He said it like a fact, without drama. It was Luciana who asked Mateo to go to the corridor with Ta Esperanza. The boy obeyed, but first he put the photograph in Rodrigo's hands. Inside, Luciana took the tin box from under the bed. She opened it. She put the 22 letters on the table, one by one, in order of date. "What is this?" asked Rodrigo. "The letters I wrote you. The ones I never sent." She paused. "The ones that never arrived because your mother made sure they didn't arrive." Rodrigo read them in silence, all of them. It took a long time. When he reached the last one, he read it twice. When he finished, he looked up. His eyes had the weight of 6 years settling all at once. "When did you know it wasn't me?" he said. "From the start," she said. "You weren't going to leave me with a 3-line letter." Rodrigo nodded. The photograph was still in his hands. "What is he like?" he asked after a moment. Luciana looked at him. Mateo, a small, involuntary smile. "Curious, stubborn. He knows when the oranges ripen, and he talks to the hens in a low voice." She paused. "He's just like you." Rodrigo went back to Papantla the next day. He reached his mother's house in the afternoon, when the sun was still high. Doa Amparo received him in the parlor as always, with the cup of coffee ready, with the habit of someone who doesn't expect things to change because she has always managed to keep them from changing. Rodrigo put the 22 letters on the table in front of her, one by one. Doa Amparo looked at the envelopes. She looked at her son. She said nothing right away. Then she said, "Where did you find that?" "In Las Palomas." "With Luciana?" "With my son." Doa Amparo opened her mouth. She closed her mouth. "His name is Mateo," said Rodrigo. "He's 6 years old. He met me today for the first time." He paused. "For the first time, Mother, Rodrigo, I only wanted—" "No," he said. The voice wasn't angry. It was something colder. "Not today. Today don't explain anything to me." He put the forged letter, the one she had written imitating Luciana's handwriting, beside the real letters. The differences were visible to anyone who looked carefully. Rodrigo had looked at them all the previous night. Doa Amparo looked at the table. She looked at her son. She said nothing more. Rodrigo told her then, with the quiet voice of someone who no longer needs to shout. 6 years, Mother. You took 6 years with my son from me." He paused. "That can't be fixed." Don Firm, the neighbor of a lifetime, had come that afternoon to find Rodrigo about a ranch matter. He was at the door when Rodrigo spoke. He listened. He saw Doa Amparo left without an answer before the letters. That night, Don Firm told his wife what he had kept silent for 6 years, the morning of the forged letter, what he had seen and hadn't said because he hadn't fully understood what he was seeing. He kept silent no longer. And small towns listen when someone who always kept silent begins to speak. Doa Amparo wasn't arrested. She didn't lose her lands. But something left that parlor that didn't return, the silent respect towns give to those who command. When the people of Papantla learned what had happened, there was no need for additional words. Rodrigo returned to Las Palomas 2 days later. He didn't bring a backpack this time. He brought Mateo by the hand, because the boy had waited for him in the corridor of the coffee field house since early morning, without anyone telling him to wait. Ta Esperanza saw the two of them arrive from the kitchen. She wiped her hands on her apron. She said in a low voice, to no one, it was about time. Luciana opened the door. She looked at Rodrigo. She looked at the boy he held by the hand, her own son, who in 2 days already held him by the hand as if it had always been so. How did it go? She asked. Hard, he said. The way it has to be when you do what you have to do late. Luciana nodded. She let him in. Inside, Rodrigo looked for the photograph on the shelf. It was in its place, as always. He took it a moment. He put it back. When did you put it there? He asked. The first day I arrived here. She looked at him. I wanted Mateo to know your face even if you didn't know his. Rodrigo didn't answer right away. He looked at the photograph, the two of them together in it, the version of 7 years ago that didn't know what was coming. Then he said, I didn't come for you to forgive me yet, Luciana. I came to know my son. The rest we'll see, with time. With time, she repeated. Yes, that was enough for that day. But before Rodrigo left that afternoon, Luciana told him one more thing. She said it from the corridor door, with the voice of someone who has waited 6 years to say it and no longer needs to dress it up. I didn't come for you to ask my forgiveness, Rodrigo. I came for you to know your son. The rest we'll see. Rodrigo looked at her. He nodded. That was the best answer he could give. When the first December rains came to Las Palomas, Mateo turned 7. The table in Ta Esperanza's corridor was full for the first time. Ta Esperanza had baked sweetbread since dawn. The neighbor women came with tamales and atole. Don Sin from the market brought oranges. The midwife Soledad, who had brought Mateo into the world that January dawn, sat in the corridor chair with a jug in her hand and watched the boy run through the patio and said it was about time. Rodrigo was sitting beside Mateo at the edge of the table. The boy showed him the oranges of the harvest and explained which were sweet and which were sour with the authority of someone who has tended that coffee field since he was 3. Rodrigo listened with that attention people have who know they lost time and aren't going to waste what's left. How many oranges fit in that basket? Rodrigo asked. Depends on the size, said Mateo. The big ones, about 30. The small ones, more. How do you know when they're ready? Mateo looked at him with the patience of someone explaining something he considers obvious. You smell them. If they smell like orange, they're ready. If they don't smell like anything, not yet. Rodrigo smiled. Who taught you that? Ta Esperanza. She knows everything about what grows. The old woman, who was serving the atole from the kitchen, heard that and said nothing. But something in her face changed a little. The way the face of people changes when they hear something that does them good without expecting it. The photograph was no longer kept in any drawer. It was on the shelf of the corridor, in its place of honor, where everyone who entered the house saw it, beside the green rebozo of Luciana's mother. Ta Esperanza had arranged it that way, without anyone asking her, as if she had always known how that shelf was going to look when the moment came. Mateo, between one orange and another, said to Rodrigo, Ta Esperanza says, you and I have the same forehead. He said it like a fact. Rodrigo looked at him. He smiled slowly. Yes, and the same hands. He showed him his hand. The boy put his beside it. They compared them in silence. Mateo laughed. It was the first time Rodrigo had heard his son laugh. Luciana from the kitchen heard that laugh. She stopped a moment with the jug in her hand. God willing, she thought, what arrives late can still arrive well. Ta Esperanza sat beside her and touched her arm. She said nothing. There was no need, but it's never too late to find what one should never have lost, even if the road to get there was long, and even if the time that went away doesn't come back. There are truths that wait with patience inside the people who carry them, and when they finally come to light, they do so with a force that no lie, however well prepared, can hold up forever. Have you ever understood too late the love of someone who, though they didn't know how to express it well, never stopped keeping a place for you in their life? If this story touched something in your heart, leave your comment below and tell us from where you're watching us today. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so no story escapes you. And if you know someone who awaits news that was slow to arrive, share this tale today. Until the next story. A heartfelt embrace, from heart to heart. And they say in Las Palomas that still, when the October fog comes down over the coffee field, Mateo and his father go out together to the corridor to watch it arrive, with the same hands, and the same forehead, and the same comfortable silence that needs no explaining.